future and extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders who are also present. On behalf of the University of New South Wales, the UNSW School of Psychiatry, and the Australian Mental Health Advisory Group, which I'm honoured to chair, a warm welcome to all. This is the 5th year of the Australian Mental Health Prize, but it's the first time we've had an online prize event. Some speakers are here with us at the university's Clancy Auditorium, and others will be joining us virtually, and that includes the Governor-General. The COVID-19 pandemic continues to change the way we do things in Australia. Paradoxically though, it may have done what years of talking has not been able to achieve, removed some, but certainly not all, of the stigma associated with mental health illness. Mental health experts have long talked about the need to remove stigma that has resulted in many Australians not seeking treatment and health. But now, because of COVID-19, more people are at least openly talking about mental health because it's given them an insight into how circumstances beyond our control, the sense of powerless over our destiny, can affect our moods, our outlook on life, and our relationships. Our keynote speaker will have more to say on the impact of the pandemic and what he describes as COVID-19's dark clouds shortly. The Australian Mental Health Prize was established by the University of New South Wales and the School of Psychiatry. It recognises individuals, teams and organisations who have made outstanding contributions to the promotion of mental health or the prevention and treatment of mental illness in Australia. UNSW values and undertakes research on mental health issues and works with many other mental health institutions and individuals. I would now like to introduce the university's Vice-Chancellor, Professor Ian Jacobs, who is joining us online. Over to you, Vice-Chancellor.
Thank you, Ita. It's a pleasure to be joining you. I too acknowledge the traditional owners of the land from which I'm speaking to you, and I pay my respects to elders past and present. It's a great honour to welcome back to a UNSW event Their Excellencies the Governor-General of the Commonwealth of Australia, the Honourable David Hurley and Mrs. Linda Hurley. In fact, our university is proud to have 3 alumni in esteemed positions at the moment. The Governor-General, the Prime Minister, and the Premier of New South Wales are all UNSW graduates, and that's a nod to the quality of a UNSW education. To all who join us tonight, welcome to the Australian Mental Health Prize for 2020. This online event format has of course become a marker of this most extraordinary of times. And 2020 is certainly a year in which the value of mental health and the dedication of its professionals has never been clearer or more critical. Droughts, bushfires, floods, and of course COVID-19. These crises have put pressure on the mental health of every Australian. And these crises have put our mental health sector under immense pressure too, as more people than ever need support. Loneliness, social isolation, and financial stress each pose an individual risk. But today we see people too often bearing the burden of all three, a reality exacerbated by the fact that we have no finish line in sight. Just as mental health needs are multifaceted, our work in mental health at UNSW is multidisciplinary. We're proud that UNSW Medicine hosts the Black Dog Institute, which is internationally recognized as a pioneer in identifying, preventing, and treating mental illness. In the social sciences, our research informs policy and expert commentary in public health. And UNSW Medicine School of Psychiatry is Australia's preeminent psychiatric research department. High quality mental health research has never been more important. Understanding the impacts of the crisis we're facing helps create good evidence-based policy decisions, prevention efforts, treatment programs, and support systems. So at this time of great need, I'm immensely proud to lead a university with strong credentials in both mental health teaching and mental health research. One of the outcomes of this year's crisis is there is a more open conversation on mental health in Australia. The shared experiences have brought a greater awareness that poor mental health can happen to any of us. This can only be a good thing for breaking down stigma, raising public awareness, and helping people to seek the support they need. So tonight, for the 5th year, the Australian Mental Health Prize will shine a spotlight on people who really are making a big difference to the mental health of Australians. And shortly you'll hear from Jack Heath, the CEO of SANE, who will speak to us. Jack is an advisory board member for the Australian Mental Health Prize, and he's made a wonderful contribution to the award. The prize continues to grow in stature and to bring attention to the great work in Australian mental health. And soon this evening, you'll hear about our 7 finalists for 2020. These are remarkable people. They work in a variety of mental health areas, including preventing suicide, Indigenous mental health, and mental health care reform. So congratulations to you all. Thank you for your tireless work, and my very best wishes for this evening.
Thank you, Professor Jacobs. Now I'd like to invite His Excellency, the Governor-General, the Honourable David Hurley, to speak.
Well, good evening, and Professor Jacobs, and thank you very much for inviting Linda and I to participate in this very special occasion tonight. And I begin also by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land, and we're on many lands tonight, and pay respect to elders past and present. Could I acknowledge Professor Ian Jacobs, your President and Vice Chancellor of University of New South Wales, and the other faculty members with us tonight, Ms Lucy Brogden, the Chair and the Commissioner of the National Mental Health Commission, Ms Ida Buttrose, the Chair, and the other members of the Prize Advisory Group, Mr Jack Heath, the CEO of SANE Australia, and of course, especially tonight to the finalists, the prize winners, and other distinguished guests. As I say, Linda and I have been delighted to be with you tonight for the Australian Mental Health Prize ceremony, whether you are like us participating online or among the audience at the University of New South Wales Clancy Auditorium in Sydney. The Australian Mental Health Prize is now to its 5th year. This prize recognises outstanding achievement in mental health and serves as an incentive to improve outcomes for people with mental illness. It also helps raise awareness in the community of the importance of mental health. Mental illness is common in our society. 1 in 3 Australians will have mental illness in their lifetime. Mental health has become part of the national conversation this year. The year has been challenging, to say the least, and many Australians have at times been overwhelmed. Linda and I have met many of these people through our visits programs. These interactions are often very confronting. The pain that people are experiencing is evident, and they need help. But we do see a strong resolve in people to press on. Now, I could be criticised for seeing Australia through rose-coloured glasses. I understand why people might have that view of me, but respectfully, I reject it outright. Why? Because every day, Linda and I see evidence of Australia at its best, and evidence of Australia's capacity and capability. We have met thousands of Australians over the past 17 months and witnessed firsthand the amazing work being done in our communities to help those in need. It's inspiring and it's reassuring. And I think Australians need to hear more of these uplifting stories. Now more than ever, it's an imperative that we talk about this success and our capabilities. Belief is infectious and will go a long way to helping our nation prosper in a post-COVID-19 world. Belief alone, of course, is not a silver bullet. Nothing is. Help, care and compassion and the services and clinical care you provide are also needed. I realise the media has a job to do, and to quote John Williamson in one of his songs, good news never made a paper sell. But I think it's very important that Australians, young Australians especially, get the message that yes, we know that times are tough now, but opportunities will open up. And there are many reasons to be optimistic about our future. To that end, of course, again, context is critical. Our nation has taken a huge hit. The impacts in Australia from the fires and the pandemic run deep and will be long lasting. But as I say, the feedback from community leaders and representatives on the ground, mayors, council representatives, health professionals, emergency service personnel and the like, is that significant progress is being made and that our communities are strong. These discussions often, nearly invariably, turn to matters relating to government policy, programming and funding, but I leave that to others. What is crystal clear, though, is that Australia has the ability to overcome adversity. Linda and I want to thank all of you, especially the 7 finalists, for the critically important work you are doing in the field of mental health. Your expertise and compassion in treating people with mental illness and your capacity to provide them with reassurance is of utmost importance. And the work you are doing will be key to ensuring the health and well-being of Australians in the years ahead. We thank you all.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. To deliver tonight's keynote address is a man who is well known and well respected and admired for his commitment to mental health. The Chief Executive of SANE Australia, Jack Heath, has been working to prevent suicide and improve the lives of people affected by complex mental health issues for more than 2 decades. After the suicide of his 20-year-old cousin in 1992, Jack was motivated to establish the Inspire Foundation and ReachOut.com, using the internet to address Australia's then escalating rate of youth suicide. As the idea of using technology to offer support and hope to young people began to take hold, Jack and his team took Reach Out to Ireland and then to the United States, where he served as CEO and was appointed to the US National Action Alliance for Suicide Prevention. In 2012, Jack was approached to take on the role of CEO at SANE Australia, where he has overseen a 4-fold increase in the reach of the organisation, building partnerships with more than 75 mental health organisations and launching a number of initiatives to prevent suicide, reduce stigma, and deliver better support for people affected by complex mental health issues. Jack finishes up at SANE at the end of this year, and in 2021 will become the new CEO at Philanthropy Australia. Jack Heath.
Thank you. Your Excellency, the Governor-General and Mrs. Hurley, UNSW Vice-Chancellor, Professor Jacobs, UNSW Dean of Medicine, Professor Perkovich, Australian Mental Health Prize Chair Ita Buttrose, my fellow advisory group members, distinguished guests, and my mad comrades. I acknowledge the traditional owners of this land, the Bedigal people, and pay my respect to their elders past, present and emerging. I extend that respect to other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who are joining us today, wherever you might be. In 1992, my mother Margaret was admitted to the Melbourne Clinic for the first time. She'd been dealing with a very difficult domestic situation and also caring for her nephew Johnny, who was struggling with schizophrenia and substance use. Mum had become disturbingly manic, yet somehow we managed to get her to agree to get help. Mum now lives in a nursing home in Melbourne with advanced dementia, but she would be happy me sharing with you her story if it helps others, as that was her approach to everyone she met. One afternoon, I was sitting with Mum at the Melbourne Clinic when Johnny and his mother Anne came to visit me. I remember Johnny having a catatonic attack on a couch in the public area as Mum raced around like an untied balloon that had been let go. In that moment, I experienced two extremes of the human state. A few months later, Johnny would attempt suicide and spend many months in hospital as a result. He was sent back home to the family farm for a few weeks' respite, but he ended his life before Christmas. In many ways, my work in mental health has been a response to that experience in the Melbourne Clinic and all that followed. It led, as Ida said, to the establishment of Reach Out Australia and in Ireland in the United States, and eventually led me to Sane Australia, although I took on the CEO role with much hesitation, given the many complex mental health issues that many in my family, including me, had experienced. So it's against this background that I want to share some reflections on mental health in the age of COVID. I deeply appreciate being asked to make this address, and I hope that what I say is of some help to others. Prior to the pandemic, we had made significant progress in bringing mental health more to the fore in our public discourse. We've done that particularly well with the more prevalent conditions of depression and anxiety, but we've not done so well with the more complex conditions. We've seen better funding in some areas, but less funding in others, including for community mental health services. And mental health's overall share of funding relative to the burden of disease remains woefully out of whack. We've probably done better supporting young people than we have for adults and older Australians, although suicide remains the leading cause of death for young people. People living with complex mental health issues have a suicide rate anywhere from 10 to 45 times the general population. Yet so often we overlook this group of people, which in fact is the group at the highest risk of suicide. And yet, as I acknowledge the great work that has been done and continues today by all the dedicated and caring professionals, support workers and carers who are developing new ways to support people towards their recovery, I still feel an unease that despite all the interventions and supports, something is not quite working with the rates of mental ill health on the rise and suicide rates stubbornly high. And then along comes COVID. This pandemic has brought many dark clouds, most especially for those who have already lost or will lose employment, along with those who have died and their loved ones. A recent survey, although it was heavily skewed to Victoria, suggested as many as 91% of people felt more depressed, 57% more anxious, 43% more stressed, and 1 in 3 people were binge drinking at least once a month. Importantly, because of COVID, we have seen the growth and expansion of telehealth services. This is a very positive development, but it still falls a good way short from addressing the funding and service inequities that occur the further you drive away from the major cities. In 2018-19, MBS expenditure on mental health services in the major cities was $55 per person. In the inner regional areas, 46. In the outer regional areas, 32. And in the remote and very remote communities, it dropped from $18 down to $9. Linked to this number, the number of mental health professionals per head of population drops significantly the further you drive away from the GPO. And compare these figures with the suicide rates. In the major cities, 10.6 per 100,000 people die by suicide, 14.8 in inner regional areas, 16.8 in outer regional areas, and 20 in remote and very remote areas. I should add that the suicide rates are the highest for people in the 2 lowest socioeconomic quintiles, and that most of the telehealth services involve a very large gap payment that is simply out of the financial reach of so many. Last year, 70% of respondents to the National Mental Health Commission's town hall meetings across Australia said that they couldn't afford services because they were too expensive. The National Mental Health Commission consultations also confirmed that stigma remains one of the biggest obstacles to good mental health care. 41% of people saw stigma as a major barrier to seeking help, second only to access to services at 50%. And last month, Sane Australia launched the National Stigma Report Card, the results of a national survey of stigma and discrimination experienced by people living with complex mental health issues. It found that 62% of people surveyed, almost 2 in 3, reported that stigma had held them back from seeking help and accessing mental health services. And while we've got so much better in sharing our stories of coping with depression and anxiety, which has reduced stigma, we haven't made the same headway with the more complex conditions like schizophrenia, bipolar, or personality disorders, but with a few notable exceptions. The Productivity Commission has acknowledged the pressing need to reduce stigma, and it is also why SANE has called for a comprehensive national 10-year program to reduce the stigma and discrimination experienced by people affected by the more complex mental health conditions. We have to counter the unfortunate stereotypes that still prevail today and are perpetuated when media spotlights and magnifies the acts of a very small number of individuals in a way that projects it as the norm for the whole population group from which they come. It's also reinforced in well-intentioned portrayals of tragic shortcomings in the mental health system that feed into a notion that people living with conditions like schizophrenia are inherently dangerous and to be avoided at all costs. It is the stigma that is the most dangerous and must be addressed whatever the cost. And so for a society with already very high levels of anxiety, COVID has made things worse. And when we are fearful or feel under siege, we take refuge in tribe. The amygdala overrides the prefrontal cortex as we seek out tribe to provide a sense of belonging, protection, and identity. And while tribe can provide some sense of security, it also starts to increasingly divide the world into us and them. We polarise, we pillory, we point figures, we start to lose a sense of our common humanity, and in so doing we diminish ourselves. At its most extreme, tribe leads to war, and sometimes, as with the Second World War, we have to see the full horrors of war, experience the worst that we are capable of doing to our fellow brothers and sisters before we come back to our senses and reconnect to our bigger, beautiful common humanity. COVID has, however, brought silver linings. And one of COVID's gifts is that it has forced us to slow down. Now, the thing about slowing down is that once we get over the shock of the initial adjustment, we start to see things that were always there before us, but which we didn't notice because we're always rushing about so much. Some of the things we now see we don't like, but we also start to see things that sustain us and which we didn't fully appreciate beforehand. The kindness of friends, family, colleagues, and neighbours we may never have spoken to before. At the same time, COVID has led a new group of people to experience mental health issues for the first time. That's been tough for them, but the silver lining is that it has awakened a greater empathy that was not there before. There's a second group of people who are dealing with mental health conditions, but unfortunately have had their symptoms amplified. They are doing it tough. A third group, sadly, have been tipped back into trauma, or double-dipped trauma, in the case of those also touched by the Black Summer bushfires. And this brings me to the fourth group of people dealing with COVID. In the early days of the pandemic, I reached out to a number of SANE peer ambassadors right around Australia. I was concerned they might not be travelling well, and some certainly weren't. But I was surprised at how well so many were managing. And the conversation would go something like this. I was socially isolated before COVID. That hasn't changed. Living on a disability support pension, I've had to scrape by for years, and I now actually feel sorry for people who have lost their jobs. Before COVID, I was dealing with my own madness, but now it seems like the whole world is mad. And by the way, I've spent the past 5, 10, 20 or 30 years dealing with crises on a regular basis, developing and honing my coping strategies, getting through one day at a time, and so I'm actually doing fine with COVID. And you know what? I might just have things to teach others. But so often we as mental health leaders, desperate to get more funding so we can help more of the people whom we care about so deeply, we put out a case for how terrible things are in a way which can underestimate and undervalue the extraordinary capabilities of people with lived experience. People who have so much to teach and guide us, be it leading service design, delivering services, or just offering us a sense of hope and possibility by virtue of sharing their individual journeys. When I first came to SANE more than 8 years ago, and despite having worked in mental health for many years, my family experiences around the more complex mental health issues led me to develop a stigmatised view of people living with these conditions. And if you'd said to me in May 2012 that when I was about to finish up at SANE Australia, many of my closest friendships that I would form would be with people who'd been diagnosed with schizophrenia, I would have laughed at you. But today, these are the people with whom I laugh deeply and often, and they sustain me. People like Simon Champ, who stood up 34 years ago and announced to an audience at the Teachers Federation Hall in Sydney, "My name is Simon Champ and I have schizophrenia." One of the most beautiful, wise and generous souls I have ever met. Janet Ma, a former Australian Mental Health Prize winner, who's been a mental health warrior and trailblazer for so many decades, with a piercing insight into the human condition, and who has offered enormous support to me personally. Kylie Griffin, a former SANE board member, who's a peer worker in country Victoria and has spent weeks in and out of mental health facilities the past 2 years, but whenever I contact her, always asks earnestly how I'm going and how is my family going. Sandy Jeffs, who was told her life was over when she was first diagnosed with schizophrenia. And that was before she went on to become a renowned raconteur, published author and poet, and who recently teamed up with the SANE co-founder Marg Leggett to write a deeply human history of Larundel Hospital in Melbourne. And that history last week was awarded the Victorian Community Oral History Prize. Sandy is always someone who cautions me about stories of recovery. While they might help some people, they can sometimes deflate others who are struggling with conditions they have not yet overcome. Elaine Bragg, a philanthropist who has had every diagnosis under the sun following childhood trauma, but who at the age of 81 years, with the support of a kind therapist and her own practice of mindfulness, turned her life around and brought joy into her life for the first time. And finally, Jackie Lane, who served as my executive assistant up until her retirement 2 years ago. Last Friday, Jackie shared that she'd recently discovered her writings from many years ago at a time when her condition was at its most florid. She'd wanted to publish her writings, and among her papers, she found a clipping from the Australian Women's Weekly inviting people to share their story, although Jackie never did. Curious, I asked Jackie, what was it that turned around things for you? Was it a person, a time? What was that set you on the path to getting better? And to my surprise, she said it was in a passage in a book her mother had given her, The Moor's Last Sigh by Salman Rushdie. She'd copied the passage by hand and put it up on her fridge. She went and got it and read it out to me. Embrace your fate. Rejoice in what gives you grief. That which you would flee, turn and run towards it with all your heart. Only by becoming your misfortune will you transcend it. When I first came to SANE, I didn't embrace my fate. I wanted to avoid that which gave me grief. But over these past years, and in the company of some remarkable humans, I've been taught how to turn and run with all my heart into the suffering, and with a confidence that one day that suffering will be transformed. In finishing, I acknowledge all those who have inspired and sustained me these past years, the work colleagues, fellow board directors, the mental health workers, the enlightened politicians and generous donors, but most of all, the people of lived experience. Although, as I've come to appreciate, these are not mutually exclusive groups. I acknowledge the many outstanding individuals who have been nominated for this Australian Mental Health Prize over the past years, not just those who have been finalists or won the prize, and it's been my privilege to learn of your stories and your selfless contribution. My mum would rate each and every one of you. Thank you, and here's to our common humanity.
Thank you very much, Jack. And now I'd like to invite the Dean of the Faculty of Medicine, Professor Vlado Perkovic, to introduce our 7 finalists.
Thank you very much, Ita. I'd like to acknowledge and welcome Their Excellencies, the Governor-General of the Commonwealth of Australia, General the Honourable David Hurley and Mrs Linda Hurley. I'd also like to acknowledge the Bejagal people, whose land we meet on today, and pay respects to elders past and present, and also extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us today. So I'm delighted to be here today celebrating amazing work in mental health on behalf of UNSW Medicine. At UNSW Medicine, our goal is to improve health, focusing on the most difficult health problems and on eliminating disparities. We're deeply involved in mental health through both teaching and research, through our own School of Psychiatry, but also across our faculty, through our key partners such as the Black Dog Institute, our sister faculties and our health system partners. This year, many of our bushfire and COVID-related research studies have focused on the mental health impacts of both of these problems, looking at the impact of a range of interventions and ways that we might improve mental health outcomes. Here in Australia, we've always led the way in working to improve mental health, and as a nation, I'm encouraged that we're increasingly encouraged to talk about mental health and the challenges that we face. And this is why, through the leadership of people like Professor Phil Mitchell, Henry Brodati and others in our School of Psychiatry, we established and continue to support the Australian Mental Health Prize. We strongly believe in the importance of highlighting and recognising leaders who are improving life for many through their work and using the opportunity to amplify the impact of their work. 7 outstanding finalists have been selected this year, and I'm amazed and impressed by their work, but also by their impact on the mental health field. The breadth of this year's finalists demonstrates the diversity and the deeply compassionate work being undertaken in so many challenging areas, improving the care of people with mental illness in the criminal justice system, promoting positive mental health in the performing arts industry, helping bring forward empathetic policy directions that support people experiencing mental distress, enhancing child and adolescent mental health, supporting the Aboriginal medical workforce, and advancing Indigenous health and mental health. But the best way to hear about their work is to hear from the finalists themselves. So I'd like to invite you to watch this video of our 7 finalists as they demonstrate not just their expertise, but especially their passion for mental health.
Hello everyone, I'm Claire Spencer. I'm the Chief Executive of Arts Centre Melbourne, and it is such an honour to receive this nomination, particularly at the moment. The live performance sector has been one of the hardest hit industries by the coronavirus, and it will be some time before we can even begin on our road to recovery. The mental health and well-being of our people at Arts Centre Melbourne, but also of all of those people who work in the live performance industry, is at the heart of the Arts Wellbeing Collective. Mental health is a complex issue at the best of times for our sector, and never more so than now. I believe it's the responsibility of every leader not only to prioritise the mental health and well-being of their teams, but also to interrogate the systems, the processes, the structures, the cultures that make up their organisations and their industry, so we can create environments across every sector where people can do their best work and can live their healthiest and wellest lives. So I'm really thrilled to be nominated for the Australian Mental Health Prize. Thank you so much.
Hello, my name's Jerry Norton. and I'm delighted to have been nominated for this award. I have worked for many years with people with serious mental health issues and their families and carers, supporting them in their recovery journeys. Currently, my work is as the Strategic Advisor on Mental Health for the National Disability Insurance Agency. In this role, I've worked with many mental health consumer organisations, family and carer organisations, and in particular Mental Health Australia, in looking at the challenges in making the NDIS work better for people with psychosocial disability. With these groups, we have been able to put forward a series of recommendations to the disability ministers, that is the Commonwealth, State and Territory disability ministers, who have accepted these recommendations as a basis for an action plan for psychosocial disability in the scheme. This has been a terrific development. The NDIS is such an important initiative for people with psychosocial disability, and it is so important we get this scheme right for current participants and for future generations. For me in this role, I do a lot of listening, I do a lot of stakeholder engagement and a lot of policy development, trying to bring together the various perspectives into workable, practical, achievable policy options for both the agency and for governments at state and territory and Commonwealth levels to consider. I'm proud of the work that I and the NDIA are doing in improving outcomes for people with psychosocial disability. Thanks for listening.
I'm Gordon Parker, an academic psychiatrist at the University of New South Wales, and I've had many privileged positions over the years, including founding the Black Dog Institute. I very much appreciate being nominated for the Australian Mental Health Prize and being one of the finalists. After decades in psychiatry, I suggest that the Dickensian worst of times and best of times reference is currently observable. Worst, COVID has built on some latent societal fracture lines in recent times. We've moved from a "we're all in this together" mantra to a more fragmented refrain. We observe a new psychological condition, state borderline disorder, while COVID-induced isolation has driven a sense of purposelessness, loneliness, anxiety, and for many, despair. Best of times? In the fight against COVID, the media has shown distinct appreciation of the mental health impact, while governments have stepped up and clearly prioritised funding mental health programs. And I continue to be struck by the resilience of so many everyday hero patients with severe mental health problems and for whom the pandemic is so commonly the least of their problems. The existence of the Australian Mental Health Prize ensures that the community is made aware of the many dedicated individuals who contribute in such strikingly differing ways to advance mental health.
Hi, I'm Professor James Ogloff from the Centre for Forensic Behavioural Science at Swinburne University of Technology and Forensic Care. I've dedicated my career to helping people with their mental health, and those engaged in the criminal justice system are among the most disadvantaged in society. It's been said that the degree of civilization in society can be judged by entering its prisons. If Australians entered our prisons, they'd be surprised to see how many people need mental health support. Hundreds of people enter our prisons each day, and as many as 4 out of 10 have serious mental health concerns. Unfortunately, they don't receive the same level of care available in the community. That's changing, and it's been my life's work to help ensure that people in the criminal justice system can have access to vital, high-quality mental health care they need. That's why I'm delighted to have been selected as a finalist for the Australian Mental Health Prize, to be given the opportunity to shed light on an area that's out of sight for most Australians, because everyone deserves recovery, and it also helps improve community safety. Thank you very much.
Hello everyone, my name is Helen Milroy and I'm a Palku woman from the Pilbara region in Western Australia, but I live in the beautiful city of Perth. I'm also the Stan Perrin Professor of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry at the Perth Children's Hospital and the University of Western Australia. I'm somewhat humbled, very excited, but also honoured to be a finalist in this year's National Mental Health Awards. And my congratulations also go out to all of the other finalists for this year. I've always been a really passionate advocate for the mental health and wellbeing of our children, particularly our Aboriginal kids, but really for any child or young person who has had significant adversity or a difficult start in life or suffered significant trauma through their development. In these difficult times that we find ourselves in, I think it's really important to focus on the wellbeing of our children. In fact, I'm hoping that this award, being a finalist in this award, can assist me in doing just that. As a nation, if we want a happy and healthy future, then we need to be focusing on the health and wellbeing of all of our children right now. Thank you.
Hi, I'm John Brogden, the Chairman of Lifeline. It's an incredible honour to be nominated for the Australian Mental Health Prize in 2020. Thank you to those who put my name forward, and thank you to those who have nominated me as a finalist. Whoever wins this prize will understand the significance of good mental health in the year 2020. We've never lived through anything like this, and whilst we've concentrated a lot on the physical health and the threat to physical health here in Australia and around the world, we've also made sure that there's been strong focus on mental health and the mental well-being of Australians. So I couldn't be prouder that as a nation, that at this incredible time of trauma and turmoil, that we've ensured that mental health is on the agenda in the same way that physical health has been on the agenda.
I'm Keith Wilson. I'm a mental health advocate from Western Australia. But more important than who I am is what I do and have tried to do for the past 30 years. That is to be a voice for people with mental illness and their family carers. I've done that by being a family member of someone with a chronic mental illness. I've tried to do it as a State Minister for Health, as Chair of the Mental Health Council of Australia, and through my involvements with various advisory bodies and policy bodies and NGOs. Currently, I'm a Director of Meeting for Minds, a charity which seeks to involve people with lived experience of mental illness as partners in research into the brain and mind, alongside those who do that research as academics and scientists.
Our 7 finalists. Congratulations to all of them. I'd now like to invite His Excellency, the Governor-General, to join us again to announce the winner of the 2020 Australian Mental Health Prize. Your Excellency.
Right, thank you. It was very inspiring hearing from all the nominees, and we do congratulate them for being considered tonight. It's now my great pleasure to announce the winner of the Australian Mental Health Prize for 2020. And this year there are actually 2 winners, Professor Gordon Parker and Professor Helen Milroy. Congratulations to you both, and well done.
Okay. Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Now, one of our winners, Professor Gordon Parker, is here at the University of New South Wales. The other, Professor Milroy, will be joining us virtually from Western Australia, and each of them will speak, beginning with Professor Parker. But before you do speak, let me present you with your medal.
Thank you so much, Ida. Thank you.
Well done. Oh, we can't shake hands. No.
Thank you. Your Excellency, Mrs. Hurley, Chair Ita Buttrose, President Ian Jacobs, Dean of Medicine Vlado Perkovic, CEO SANE Jack Heath, colleagues and guests. Congratulations to the organisers of the Australian Mental Health Prize. It shines, as we've heard several times tonight, a bright light on mental health activities in this country and advances destigmatisation. Congratulations to all finalists, and especially to joint winner Helen Mulroy, and finally, my sincere thanks for the prize. I'm extremely appreciative. I'd also like to thank my nominee, my employer, University of New South Wales, the NHMRC that has funded my research for over 40 years, my colleagues, my wife Heather, who has ever graciously allowed me to be a workaholic, and the patients whose conditions have shaped my research, while their grit has shaped my admiration and drawn it extensively. I've mused recently over what shaped my fascination with psychiatry. I now admit from the year I entered it, as a career, I had a focus, if not fixation, on diagnosis. Journalist Catherine Montgomery wrote in relation to medicine in general, just having a diagnosis means that the rest of your life can start. And further, patients want to know what is wrong, if it's serious, how long it will last, and whether it will alter their life plans. I believe those views hold just as strongly for psychiatry patients. And yet when I entered psychiatry, there was minimal interest in diagnosis, perhaps a leftover reflection of psychoanalysis dominance. And whereas everyone receives such a therapy, irrespective of their condition, making a diagnosis was irrelevant. These days, the situation appears a little better. When I interview patients, assessed and treated by other mental health professionals, and ask, what diagnosis did you receive? So many state that they never received one. Why? I think the most common reason is that mental health professionals' treatment models largely reflect their training or discipline. If a depressed patient sees a GP or a psychiatrist, they're highly likely to receive medication. If they see a psychologist, they're highly likely to get CBT. If they see a counsellor, they're highly likely to get counselling. If they see a lady wearing a caftan, they're highly likely to get crystal therapy. This I view as a Procrustean one-size-fits-all model, fitting the patient to the therapist's discipline or clinical training, a paradigm rather than fitting the therapy to the specific condition, which is the model in the rest of medicine. Secondly, some practitioners judge it better to prioritise the patient's life story than provide a diagnosis. The two are not mutually exclusive. Both should occur so that there is a formulation which basically says why this person developed this condition at this particular point of time. Thirdly, an increasing tendency in recent years to dimensionalise conditions, to weight severity only, which is akin to deciding to order a car based on whether you want a larger or small one rather than its type. And it's a very slippery slope as to when, if you use a dimensional model, to decide whether somebody's a case as experiencing a normal reaction. To wit, clinical depression. When the first antidepressant was discovered, the manufacturer decided that they wouldn't take it to market as they judged it as an insufficient market. There weren't enough people with clinical depression. Now clinical depression, like religion, is all around. A fourth explanation. Many diagnoses are pseudo-diagnoses and uninformative. The American classificatory DSM manual has a condition termed major depression, which is positioned as an entity, as if it's a single condition. And so many research papers start by saying major depression is a disease which is persistent and recurrent and needs assertive treatment. But it's no more an identity than a diagnosis of major breathlessness. If your GP gave you the latter diagnosis, you would not be particularly informed. You'd want to know whether you actually had asthma or pneumonia or a pulmonary embolus, because you would know then that you'd get a more rational, specific treatment, an antibiotic, or a bronchodilator or an anticoagulant, even though I didn't get them in the right order. Somehow major depression just simply homogenizes multiple depressive subtypes, some with biological, some with psychological, and some with social causes. only by diagnosing those subtypes does treatment become rational, then subject to fashion or differing health disciplines operating along party lines, as I've noted. Fifthly, some say that making a diagnosis is all too hard and that there are no laboratory tests. Well, the same for many conditions in medicine. Take Parkinson's disease. There is no specific lab test, and yet no neurologist walks away saying it's all too hard. They respect diagnosis and they employ clinical reasoning. No, we do have a few lab tests, but we more importantly have tools. Recognizing the importance of diagnosing differing mood disorders, we developed the Mood Assessment Program, or MAP, some years back. The patient completes a detailed questionnaire, and via a series of algorithms, diagnoses are generated and accompanied by specific or condition-specific treatment guidelines. The MAP is provided at no cost to health professionals or to patients, and there are now some 5,000 MAP providers in Australia. It has about 80% accuracy in differentiating melancholia, which is the biological depression, from other depressions, and some 80% accuracy in differentiating the bipolar disorders, both key to treatment selection. However, in the last year, using machine learning and artificial intelligence strategy, we've developed algorithms that differentiate on those two examples that I've given with close to 100% accuracy. So there are tools to assist clinical judgment. Not a week goes by when a patient and or their relatives tell me how important it was for them to receive a diagnosis of their mood disorder. The most striking scenarios are when a bipolar patient is identified in someone who'd previously been informed that they had depression and never respond to differing medication, or were told that they had a borderline personality disorder and had psychotherapy for years. And when bipolar-specific treatment is initiated, their condition comes under control after years of struggling. To hear a patient say, "Thank you, doc, I've got my life back," is the reward that continues to drive me and will occasionally bring me close to tears. You therefore may diagnose me as narcissistic. I hope not. I hope it more reflects a passion to sharpen the diagnosis of differing mood disorders, to then make treatment choice more logical for the patient's condition and their understanding. My thanks again.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Professor Parker. And now we're going across WA to Perth to ask other winner, Professor Helen Milroy.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for allowing me to present from Perth today. I'll just make some acknowledgements. I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of all the lands on which we're meeting tonight and pay my respects to their ancestors past, present and emerging. And of course to His Excellency General, the Honourable David Hurley, Governor-General of the Commonwealth of Australia, and Her Excellency Mrs Linda Hurley, Dwight Buttrose, Chair of the Australian Mental Health Prize Advisory Group, Professor Ian Jacobs, President and Vice-Chancellor of UNSW, Jack Heath, CEO of SANE Australia, Professor Perkovic, Dean Faculty of Medicine, and the other advisory board members, who include a very impressive list of Australians, including Professor Pat McGorry, Essie Carreau, Sophie Scott, Greta Bradman, Lucinda Brogdon, Professor Broderty, Professor Mitchell, Professor Sanchev, and Professor Eapen. To my co-winner, Professor Gordon Parker, and all the other fellow nominees, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very honoured to be here this evening. I'm a proud Palpu woman. My traditional homelands are in the Pilbara region in Western Australia, and I'm very pleased and excited to be joining you all from the beautiful city of Perth. I'm honoured and humbled to be a co-winner of this year's Australian Mental Health Prize alongside my esteemed colleague, Professor Parker. I would like to thank the Advisory Board and UNSW for making this award possible and for shining a light on some of the excellent work taking place right across our nation to improve the mental health and well-being of all Australians. I have always been a passionate advocate for mental health, and especially the social and emotional well-being of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, as well as our children, regardless of where they've come from. This has been an extraordinary year in so many ways. It has presented many challenges and a lot of opportunities, but I think it is probably safe to say that this year has made us all reflect to some degree on the well-being of our communities, our families, and of ourselves. As we move forward, we are still yet to see the full impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on our mental health, but it has been inspiring to see so many people talking, sharing, and working towards making mental health and well-being a national priority, and that has to be a good thing. I am particularly keen to highlight the needs of our children and the many difficulties and challenges that they face during these most unprecedented times. As I think back about how my life and work has changed, and it has changed considerably, I am mindful of the new normal we are now entering into and just what this means for the well-being of our children. I also reflect back on how we as Australians have been able to rise to the challenges, create new ways of working, and be more collaborative and innovative along the way. What we've achieved in this last year was something we wouldn't have hoped to achieve in 10 years. So we can do amazing things in this country. With all of this behind us, I see no reason at all why we cannot tackle the many problems our children face, such as inequities in services, disadvantage, lots of adversity and trauma in childhood, and ongoing racism and discrimination. I think we are a very wealthy and prosperous nation. We have the resources and we know what it takes to support our families and the models of care they need, particularly the children who are struggling. And we should be able to provide them with the very best we can offer to bring about their healing journey, not a fragmented system. I have learned so much and continue to learn from the many children, families, communities and colleagues I have worked with and shared the many heartbreaks and joys with along the way. Children are no more immune to mental health challenges than the rest of society, yet they are easily overlooked and thought to be resilient. I believe Australia's greatest hope for the future rests in the potential of all of our children. I look forward to a greater focus and investment in our kids, their family and communities, and I hope we can feel proud when we look back, knowing we did everything we could to give children the opportunity to thrive, to support them when they faltered, and to make sure they received the most comprehensive and well-resourced mental health services available when they needed them, regardless of who they are or where they live. That really would be something to celebrate. And from an Aboriginal perspective, I'll leave you with this thought. Children are a gift, born from country into a family, ancestry and culture, as enduring as the universe. We are all connected for eternity through love, life and spirit. I wish you all safe journeys home and hope we will continue to shine a light on mental health and well-being for us all. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Milroy. And congratulations again. And now I'd like to invite back the Dean of the Faculty of Medicine, Professor Perkovic.
Thank you, Ita. And thank you to the Governor-General for presenting this very important award to our amazing winners, Professor Helen Milroy and Professor Gordon Parker, AO. Congratulations, Helen and Gordon. I'm delighted to see your accomplishments recognised through this prestigious award. Gordon, your contribution to the field of mental health in Australia is great in every sense of the word. From your role in founding the Black Dog Institute, through your innovative strategies to destigmatise mood disorder, to your research challenging the current one-size-fits-all approach for different conditions, your impact stretches across Australia and around the world. Helen, you've broken through barriers as the first Indigenous Australian to become a medical doctor. Never stepping away from challenging spaces, you've advocated for all to be heard, especially in your role as the Commissioner on the Royal Commission into Institutional Responses to Child Sexual Abuse. Your holistic approach combining Aboriginal and Western knowledge systems has and will continue to change the lives of many Australians. Thank you and congratulations to you both. Thank you also to all those who've been involved in producing the Australian Mental Health Prize. An event such as this requires a huge amount of work behind the scenes. On behalf of UNSW, I'd like to thank the Advisory Committee, Your continued commitment to recognising and celebrating this essential area of health is so greatly appreciated. I'd also like to thank the UNSW DEX team for their hard work in producing the prize, especially the technical team for keeping this event running so smoothly. Finally, my thanks to the judges who took the time to sift through the many applications to find our winners for this year, and of course to the ever fabulous Ida Buttrose for chairing and for her ongoing support for the prize. There's no doubt that improving mental health sits at the heart of our mission and our collective goal to improve health. And with all these amazing people working in the field, I hold very high hopes for the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor. We have come to the end of our formal proceedings. I'd like to once more congratulate our winners and our finalists. Many thanks to our speakers and especially the Governor-General and Mrs. Hurley. We're so delighted they could be with us tonight. And thank you to all of you here at the University of New South Wales and all of you watching online, wherever you are. Good night to you all.